Hello everyone, this is your host Nandini Ray and welcome to the Maitri podcast between friends, conversations with Maitri. I'm delighted to welcome you to season 8 of the Maitri podcast. For the past 7 seasons, we have brought together community members, survivors, advocates, and service providers to have honest conversations about domestic violence, gender-based violence, healthy relationships, and the cultural dynamics that shape the lives of South Asian communities. Our goal is simple to spark dialogue, challenge harmful norms, and inspire meaningful change. If you are new to our podcast, you can catch up on all previous episodes on Maitri Bay Area's YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify. Today, we plan to explore a question that affects many families in our communities but is not discussed often enough. How do harmful cultural norms, traditions, and deeply rooted beliefs impact intimate partner relationships, and what can we do to change them? To help us unpack this important topic, I'm honored to be joined by two distinguished members from the Pakistani community, Ahsan Qazi and Maria Ahmad. Let me introduce them first. Ahsan Qazi is a writer, researcher, entrepreneur, and sociologist with a deep interest in understanding the forces that shape society. He is the founder of One Voice, Pakistan and World Affairs in Sociological Perspective. Ahsan has written extensively on social, political, and global issues with his work published in Eurasia Review. His research explores inequality, governance, identity, and the growing impact of artificial intelligence on society, political beliefs, and human behavior. Maria Ahmed is an international development professional with over 20 years of experience advancing gender equality, migration, and institutional accountability across UN agencies and international organizations. An award-winning former journalist, Maria has reported extensively on gender and human rights issues and has worked on safeguarding migration and technology facilitated gender-based violence. Wow. Thank you both for being here and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nandini. Much appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thank you as well, and glad to be here.
To begin, I would like to take a step back and look at where many of our beliefs about relationships first take shape. We often think that relationship challenges begin after marriage or after we form an intimate partner relationship. But many of them actually are rooted much earlier in the values and expectations we grow up with. So, from your perspective, what are some of the normalized gender roles, cultural expectations, and family traditions in Pakistani households that shape unequal power dynamics in relationships even before a couple starts their life together? So, any of you can start.
Well, thanks, Nandini. I think I will, besides the usual one on families and close family role models that we have within our aunts and uncles, and of course, more than anything that affects us is our parent and relationship as a couple. I think the other big one that I want to add in it, which I feel we don't really see very much and has been included in more recent studies, is our look at media. I think a lot of the conversation, specifically speaking about South Asian media, which, we are broadly influenced significantly by Bollywood. And it's not just Bollywood alone. Other major movie production centers like Hollywood, like Nollywood from Nigeria as well. Any rom-com will actually stop at the idea of, they met each other and ... they lived happily ever after. We started reading this, we started watching this. So very much every teenage girl was growing up with these lovely ideas of there'll be a marriage, there'll be all this great stuff, I'll be having fun, and then everything's going to be fine because I will have found the prince that I'm going to live with. And that's where it started. And I think over time, what has faded to kind of neutralize or at least balance this view has been the fact that we used to have adults who used to talk about these things. About 2 to 3 generations ago, there were adults in the family who would talk about these things. We would see these things much more so in the environment. My grandmother, for example, grew up watching other family members, female family members, seen how things were working. Whereas in our case, a lot of the current focus is very much on the celebration of the wedding, and everyone's talking about everything from the dress to the jewelry to the makeup to the date where we're going to dance. But nobody actually talks about the marriage. What I like very much, I think, in couples or families which have very Christian-based values is there still continues to be a need to go and talk to the priest before you actually are going to get into marriage. And that's where a lot of the real practical conversation happens. And I think that for South Asian cultures, that character did not exist. So family, media, and a balanced view of the real life. And lastly, I would say that while these can be very interesting places to learn about it, it has also changed dramatically. The dynamic is very different now from having joint families to now having nuclear families. A couple who will migrate will raise their kids alone in this economic system where we're living, where almost all cultures and countries are talking about how we're all on a burnout scale. These dynamics have also significantly changed how relationships are working. And I feel like we don't have enough of a conversation or even places of conversation where we can actually heal intimate relationships, which are becoming role models for our children.
Can you share one or two examples where you see that we are normalizing harmful gender roles in our day-to-day lives?
Yes, very much so. Men are still kind of seeking the idea of they used to watch their dad come home and just relax. And the mom used to be ready with a cup of chai, and dinner would be ready and the house would be clean. And that's the image, of course, that they have seen, and that's what they've grown up with, whether with their own parents or masi or pupis or whatever, right? So those are things that they have seen. And so they grow up with the same image. Now, on the other hand, as I was saying, that the economic system and social differences now are the most often than not, and this happens a lot more. I wouldn't even say anymore that this happens in diaspora. This also happens what we would say back home in India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, everywhere. Women and young girls are far more independent. They are on every scale of education, growth, development are not equal to men, but they've actually excelled, particularly academically. And that, of course, translates into becoming developed professionals. And so many of these women who've invested in their careers for themselves, for helping out their families, are not willing to give that up. And now that sort of dynamic is unseen for men in our culture. And how does that dynamic change? So then the woman does the work. And interestingly, we've seen much, again, I'll go back to media and cases in real life as well, where it almost is like, oh, we want a padi likhi bahu, an educated daughter-in-law. We want a daughter-in-law who's a doctor, and she should also go to the hospital because there's pride and money and all involved. So that's all great, excellent. But then nobody's prepared for the reality that this padi likhi daughter-in-law is also going to be doing a full-time job, and she's going to be still asked to be responsible for the house, the kids, the care of the husband, the care of the elderly parent. So these are dynamics which we have seen, but we've not moved and changed and evolved with the time.
Yes, so she will still be expected to make chai when husband comes home.
Right. So the way you opened up the question, Nandini, and even some of the points Maria added, I mean, I'm just going to add to those points as well. So the question really begins is like these unequal dynamics in relationships, they don't just develop, the couples start their journey. It just develops very early in their childhood. As the girls are growing up, usually they're told to be caregiving, even at a very young age. Look after their little brothers, look after other people in the family, be more respectful, to be modest, also emotionally compose themselves. While men, on the other hand, boys, as they're growing up, one message we're given constantly and repeatedly is be a man, be tough. Boys don't cry. If even during play we get hurt, like toughen up, get back up. And these are our social basically conditioning, and these are our cultural conditioning that's been happening since very early on. So men have a very specific role they take on, or they're expected to take on, while women, they're more prepared for the life that's to come during marriage, because all that girls constantly being told even in their very young age, hey, learn to cook. One day you will go to your own house, so you will need to do these things for not only for you, but for your husband and for your kids. So those roles are very structured from very early on. As people move into relationships, there's still that element that these roles are pushed not only by the social conditioning or the social environment, but rather the extended family as well. But now one thing is, which Maria also hinted at, is social and economic conditions are now changing. Now, whether whether you live in Pakistan or whether you live in US, couples, both of them are getting educated, going out in public, seeing the world, a woman taking role of leadership in their professionalism. And that kind of mindset then comes back to the house. And when that mindset comes back to the house, women still are expected to cook, clean. And speaking of, there's a story that comes to mind. So I was sitting at a restaurant and there's an imam I know here in Bay Area. He comes in. So I greet him, I meet him. So I ask him, what's up? So he tells me, I'm here to do marriage counseling for these two young people. And then while he was talking to me, he got a phone call from this lady who was panicking on the phone. She was a Pakistani lady who was panicking on the phone. She was like, come now, come to my house now. I need your help. So he asked him, okay, wait, tell me what happened. So now here's this example. This lady, she's a PhD. She works, her husband also has master's in computer science. He also works at a tech company. Husband comes back and says, hey, make me some tea. The wife responds, what? Can't you see I'm tired myself? Can't you get up and make the chai yourself? And this erupts into a big conflict between them to a point where the lady leaves her house and she's calling the imam, come to my rescue. He's angry at me. He's following me. He's chasing me and he's being very violent. Come and help me. Now you have these two highly educated individuals working for tech companies. They're playing their professional roles. But as soon as they come back to their homes, they fall back into these cultural dynamics that have been set, while ignoring the fact that both of them are working, both of them have to work, especially if you're living in an expensive place like a Bay Area. So these dynamics, even though the economic situations change, the social condition settings are changing, but these cultural dynamics are still at the core of our communities, Pakistani community, Indian communities. Second thing is, what I will say is media, like Maria said, has had a great role in this. So lately I've been watching a lot of 80s Bollywood movies, and my interest in those Bollywood movies is to kind of look at the impact of communism in Bollywood movies and that kind of message being carried on in Bollywood movies, where the hero of the movie is always about helping the poor, fighting against the rich. He's kind of against this capitalist mentality and he wants to level the play field. But then there's also another dynamic I keep seeing in these old Bollywood movies where women, they're almost worshipping their husbands. And there's always that context of Hinduism where it's also justifies with religion that she must obey him, she must follow his directions. And to a level, I saw this movie where the hero of the Bollywood movie, he falls in love with another woman, but his dad decides to marry him to someone else. That woman is so obedient to the father-in-law or to be the father-in-law. And she says, it's okay if he's in love with another woman. I will, the Hindi word that's used is, I will be his dasi. Like basically, I will like still worship him. I'll still take on my role as a wife and accept whatever he does. So these dynamics are at the core of our media still. So again, media also perpetuates these dynamics and keeps the status quo in place. And there rarely is any movies out there that are openly challenging this. I'm not going to generalize and say that these dynamics are not being challenged, but it's very rare that you see those kind of movies. Look at the level of servitude the women show in those movies. They are playing that gender role. So this social conditioning, the social environment that people have been constantly living in, these dynamics, irrespective of the education level, irrespective of changing economic conditions, are still, I think, at the core of our communities today. And then that creates an unbalance. And last thing I will say is religion, especially for South Asian communities, speaking for Pakistani communities, Islam is at the core of our communities. The problem in our communities is, to just sum this up, because the religion is not properly studied, it's not properly implemented. Therefore, people misuse religion to keep that control. Whereas Islam is a religion of justice in terms of maintaining the rights of your parents, maintaining the rights of your spouses, maintaining the rights of your neighbors. But, a lot of us have a very basic understanding of the religion, but when it comes to implementation, most of us fail. Therefore, the use of religion is constantly used to keep these dynamics in place. Hence, again, when people do enter into marriage, the man is, right, because he has been given the authority to give talaq, therefore he can pull that card at any time when things do not go their way. Whereas women do have rights, but again, women are told to be patient and for them to exercise their right to get out of a harmful marriage. They rather be in it for the sake of being in it to maintain their marriage and not part ways, because again, society, community has just conditioned them to serve. And men, on the other hand, for the lack of the understanding of their religion thoroughly, they fail at implementation.
So as you were speaking, Hassan, I couldn't help but thinking that about how many of these expectations are also familiar in Indian household. You were taking examples from Pakistani community. Yeah. I came from India. I grew up in an Indian household. I'm seeing the same thing, that women, whether it is rural areas or whether it is urban cosmopolitan area or whether it is in here in this country. I'm not saying that all South Asian families or community members are like that, but we are still seeing that perception, that cultural conditioning, that training. And even I know you also spoke about it, we are changing for better, but that's good. But still, if we see two people are thinking about that kind of a harmful notion and implement that is dangerous. So Maria, I would love to hear your perspective in your experience. What does the idea of a good wife often look like in Pakistani family, and how do those expectations influence emotional closeness, communications, and equality between partners?
This is very close to home, Nandini. This is very close to home because, oh my God. So I was very lucky in the sense, my sisters and I, that we have, both our parents, we were raised in Saudi Arabia, which was itself a very constricting environment to start with. But inside our house, things were very different. And again, going back to role models, right? And so my mom obviously came from a standard family in the sense of traditions and cultures and rituals. So girls have to get married and they should have certain skills like khana pakana and roti pakana and chai banana. And thank God by that time it was not very much because we had tailors available, so you didn't have to stitch buttons and all of that kind of stuff. But you needed to know at least running the kitchen and keeping the house clean and managing your children were like very basic necessities that you must have. And so, of course, even in Saudi Arabia, there's again a very large South Asian diaspora that works in the GCC countries. And so we had other family friends as well. And all these other friends of my mom basically were of the same mindset as well. And they said they were at that time when we all started becoming teenagers, everybody would be talking about, yes, I told her how to make roti this week. And next week, when the summer vacations are starting, I will start making sure that she knows a couple of talent to how to make at home, etc. So every summer vacation was like a home economics course for the girls basically at home. And so I remember there was this one time when I was 14 or 15, and because there wasn't much for girls to do in Saudi Arabia, because, we needed to depend on our father to take us to our friends' homes or do anything. We just used to go to school, come back and spend the rest of the day at home. There wasn't sport, we weren't allowed to go out much. And as you grew older and older, it was not just the burqa, the abaya, what they used to call it. That was indicative as well that you were an older girl. So you just weren't under 10 or 12 anymore. You couldn't be playing in the park or whatever. So in that way, our life was very close. So we all fell in love with reading, and our father used to make sure that we went for buying books all the time. Whenever we wanted, we ran out of books, he'd take us. And so I remember I was reading one of my fictional novels on summer holidays, and my mom calls me to the kitchen and she says, "Beta, idhar aao aake, chalo tumne ab roti banani. Aaj roti banani sikhani hai maine. I'm going to teach you how to make a roti today." And I already, like most teenagers, you just at that teenage, you always are groaning about everything. And so I was groaning already, and I came to the kitchen, and of course, in a bad mood, I started working with the flour. And next thing you know, I had flour spilled all over my black shirt. And my mom was like, "You're not paying attention." Of course, she got mad at me. And she's like, "You're just doing all of this because you don't want me to do this. You're not interested in it." And I remember it was the weekend. My father was sitting elsewhere in the house, and he heard this commotion. And then he just called from there. He's like, "Jab time aayega, seekh legi. When it's time for her to learn it, she will learn it." And my mother says to him, "Aayega, us waqt koi shaadi nahi karega isse because usko roti nahi banani aati, and no one's going to marry her, and that's going to be on your head. She doesn't know how to make roti." And my dad says, "Oh, well, maybe she will actually hire somebody to make the roti for her. Maybe if she ends up studying and being a good professional, she won't need to make it herself, And my mother just answers him, "You and your liberal thinking, this is is all going to land us in hot water, and then you will be responsible. Don't come to me, both of you, at that time and tell me that we are having trouble in her married life, etc. That was one of the first comments that I remember way back in my childhood. And those sorts of things kept coming back when it was kind of time for me to get married. It was all about, bas bachchiyon ki ye age hoti hai, shaadi ho jani chahiye. In fact, I remember I came to the US to study when I was 17 and a half. I came to do my bachelor's and master's here. And I remember that when I returned, my parents had moved out of Arabia to Pakistan by that time. And I remember people saying to my mom when they used to come visit our house, they're like, oh, so she's not engaged. You sent her to America without engaging her to come? How could you do something like that? That you were just 17, you sent her. And I started seeing how all these concerns that my mother had, she still carried that. Although she was an immigrant, she carried that culture with her. She remembered how we, her daughters, were going to be judged in that culture if we didn't know the gold roti and the chai and the Sina Purona, all those things, So she knew that this was going to cost. So these sorts of examples, I would say, honestly, I've lived them very up close. I remember my first marriage was to this Pakistani man who was living in Canada. So of course we didn't know each other. And while I was okay to the idea of like my parents arranging my marriage, I didn't have a boyfriend. Again, another thing, about like, oh my God, if she has a boyfriend back, it's more acceptable today, but back then, we're talking 20 years ago, it was impossible. So I remember my getting married, and we didn't live together because he flew out that night, the night we got married, because he was going to apply for my visa and I was going to move to Canada and whatever. And over the course of the next 6 months, I found out that he was quite abusive. He was very hot-tempered and everything. And I remember my father asking me 6 months later, he said, you don't look very happy. And I finally told him, I didn't tell him anything because it was part of the norm. I remember one of my older cousins had gotten married very recently, and her husband had physically hit her in the first month of the marriage, and she came back to her parents. And all the badas of the family, as Ahsan was saying, the girls are supposed to be more patient and understanding and forgiving, etc. And literally, all the elders of the family got together. They talked to the husband's family about this cannot happen, etc. And my cousin had to go back. It was like nobody stopped to ask her, how do you feel about this? It was still a slap, How do you feel about it? Is it like a lasting thing for you? Do you want to take your time to think about it, right? And so because that had happened to her, it was very fresh in my mind. And I kind of took it as given that, okay, well, it happened to her. He's just verbally abusing me. So it's okay. This though happens in Shadi. You've got to live with that. And I remember telling my father about that. I didn't really feel very good the way he talks to me and everything. And I remember my dad picking up the phone. Just that instant, he called the guy up in Canada and he said, you know what? Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure getting to know you. I just want to let you know that this marriage is now off. We will be sending back every gift and things that you have sent around for the marriage and, the nikah ceremony, everything that you gifted her. All of that shall be delivered to your mother's house later this evening. But and next week you should have the court's notice for the divorce, for the khula. And he just lost his mind and he started saying things. You have no idea. Your daughter has not been trained. She is just not ready for a marriage, etc., etc. And my father said, yes, I completely agree with you. Yes, it's a terrible match. Yes, my daughter is not a good match. You deserve much better. Thank you. I really appreciate it. And that was the end of it. I remember my mother completely being horrified and she said, oh my gosh, what will happen to her younger sisters? Nobody is going to get married to them now that they know that the oldest one has been divorced. Impossible. This is what have you done? We could have talked about it. It's fine. This all happened. And so that, I was just 20 something. I look back now and I think about it, how entrenched all of this is. My mother would never stand for herself or her sisters or any of her close friends. And she talked about her close friends who had marriages like this. And my mom always used to be the counselor or the mentor for them, hearing aid for them, supporting them. She would never stand for that for her friends. And yet for her, it was like, oh, we can talk to the boy. We can talk him out of this behavior and it's going to be fine, right? So yeah, there's many, I just close at saying that, yeah, there's many examples very close to home where I have seen these dynamics. I will add that, yes, I eventually got very happily married to a South American Latino. And often Pakistani people would say, of course, someone as independent and empowered as you could never be happy with a Pakistani man. You had to have somebody, Firangi, some foreign guy, And that always made me question, like what are we doing wrong? What is going wrong with us, with our families? What are we teaching our boys? Exactly what Ahsan said. It was so funny. I just came back for a drive from LA and the comments around my daughter's behavior is, oh, she's been lovely. She's been an excellent girl. She's been picking up after the the kitchen. And the comment around my boy is just like, oh yeah, he behaved well. So what are we doing? I just asked my son, I said, how come you didn't pick up the plates? Oh no, I did. But those are the things that we entrench, that girls have to be अच्छी बेटी, सुलझी भी बेटी, तमीजदार बेटी, बात सुनने वाली बेटी, whereas the boy is free to do whatever he wants, right? So I'll stop here.
Thank you, Maria, for sharing such a powerful experience. And I hope that men from all South Asian communities, all men should listen to this podcast to know how your dad stood up for you. I have a lot of respect for your dad. And, growing up, many of us in Indian households heard messages that a woman should adjust, compromise, put her family's needs before her own, and preserve family honor, family harmony, even at the expense of her own well-being. Like, forget about you, think about your family, your husband, your in-laws, your children, everyone. I know every family is different, every individual is different, but these patriarchal expectations have been normalized across many South Asian households and many communities. Today we are talking to each other and we are seeing that the same challenges persist in all South Asian communities. I actually was talking to a Sri Lankan girl. She was explaining the same thing. So we are on the same boat. We are seeing the same challenges, and together we have to fight against those challenges. Like a simple example, when a father is taking care of babies in absence of mother, they are highly appreciated. Oh, look at that man, is doing a lot. But the opposite, when a woman is taking care of children, nobody pays attention. It's women's job to take care of family. Why should we even praise her? Women, when they're traveling for work, leaving their children behind, people are saying that, oh, she's not thinking about her family, she's not a good mother. I'm not saying everybody is saying that, but if one person is saying that, that is wrong. And when men are doing the same thing, they are traveling for work, and then everybody is like praising him. Look at him. He is working hard for his family. So yes, we are seeing double standard and inequality in every community, in every culture. So now we have talked about the expectations placed on women, but gender norms don't just shape women's lives. They also define what community culture expects from men. So those expectations can create pressure that often goes unspoken. So Ahsan, I would like to bring you back into the conversation. So do you think expectations around masculinity, such as being provider, decision maker, being strong, etc., affect men and their ability to build healthy relationships?
Absolutely. Like I mentioned before, as boys are growing up, one message we constantly get is to be tough, to be out there, to take leadership, to take initiatives, irrespective of whether we fail or pass on taking on those initiatives. But that's a general expectation that's set, right? In doing so, the idea of whole toughening up is to basically suppress your emotions. You might be feeling emotionally challenged. For a man to go and discuss that, that's not looked upon the right approach, simply because as a man, you're supposed to understand the world through your elders' experience and take those experience and make that your experience, and then not form your own thinking, not form, especially in South Asian cultures. I have seen so many examples where fathers are advising their sons, do this, do what I'm telling you. And when they do come back to express something, usually it's a outright brutal rejection of how they feel about certain things. So that burden is always there, where you're expected to basically go ahead, follow the instructions or take charge of, and then deliver a result. In terms of finances, in terms of, going out there, be the breadwinner. Again, those norms have been set not only culturally, but also as well as religiously. So again, speaking for Pakistanis, speaking for Muslims, Quran has clearly defined those norms for men to be the breadwinners, and it has placed women also in certain category of duties that they must perform, meaning, raising the children, making sure children are raised upon the right, what we call fitra, the right inclination, meaning they have good education, because Islam says that women are the first school that children get. So these are religiously also given these duties, but again, when I talk about the religion, because it is a core part of us, I do want to mention that one has to have a very clear-cut understanding of what those duties are, what the bounds are, and how both genders can actually work with each other within those bounds. Again, unfortunately, most of us fail in implementing those, but there is that constant pressure of being successful for men. If you do not have a good job, or any job for that matter, you're considered useless. And therefore, your status as a man goes down. Then you get these comments from not only your direct family members, you have people outside in the society giving you those kind of remarks that just bring your self-esteem down. So this kind of pressure is upon a man. And then again, that causes a very deep psychological trauma where it becomes an issue of self-esteem. Then, like somebody made a remark about me not having a job. Now I must prove to themselves, right? It becomes about that. It doesn't become about individual success at that time, but it becomes more about proving to the society. So what I'm trying to say here is the burden of proving to the society, to people around you, becomes more for a man, a pressure, than just saying, I want to be something. I want to go through my own journey and learn and grow. So then, that whole passion also dies down for the person because you have these societal pressures on you. Other than that, what I would say is, as far as South Asian community goes, I think we need to have an honest conversation about the emotional balancing when they're in this dynamic of relationship, spousal relationship, where man can easily go talk to his spouse about these issues and translate. But again, women are also not trained really well on this aspect, that when a man comes to them with certain emotional issues, how they should deal with those. Therefore, both of them become restricted in playing their roles and not able to help each other, which again pours into more problems in their social relationships.
So I actually want to focus on something that research consistently shows. That in our work, we see that women experience the vast majority of intimate partner violence and that most perpetrators are men. But at the same time, we must acknowledge that the vast majority of men are not abusive. Most men are not abusive. And many actually want to build a respectful partner relationship. So at Maitri, we believe engaging men and boys is an essential part of prevention. If we want to prevent domestic violence, we must engage men and boys, not because they are the problem, but because they can be an ally and they should be part of the solution. So Ahsan, in your opinion, how can we encourage men and boys to see gender equality not as a loss of power, but as an opportunity to build healthier, happier, fulfilling relationships?
So the starting point, in my opinion, is that these conversations need to happen, and these conversations need to happen by some of the community member that people rely on. For example, in the context of Pakistani men before their marriage now are having counseling with these imams. When they sit down with these imams, I think these imams also need to be very well versed on these issues to bring up these issues and discuss these issues with them. But the only thing I say here challenge is that right now we have a lot of so-called scholars in our community who themselves are not well versed on these issues. Therefore, they're not able to educate men the proper way. And they, again, enforce certain norms upon these men because, hey, you're gonna go into this marriage. This is going to be your role. This is what you have to do. And this is how you have to deal with your wife. I think a proper education needs to happen. And I think this education needs to happen very early on. Even I would say put that into school curriculums as well, from middle school, and train both men and women deal with these dynamics, to see to even have them role play during even their education time, to see how these dynamics would translate. I remember in middle school, which was to my shock, because when I came to US, I started with middle school. So I believe it was in the 8th grade, in one of my classes, we were basically both female students and male students. We were told to take like a dummy baby and nurture that baby for like a month. We had to keep a log of the routine of the feeding the dummy baby, changing the diapers, and all that. So that dynamic was being taught to us in middle school, of course, they were doing it from the health perspective, but taking care of the baby, which I learned in middle school. But like in most South Asian communities, I don't think this happens in middle school because a sense of responsibility is taught to you from very early age. So conversation, then teaching
Education.
men education, yes, and giving them a sense of responsibility, and then also making sure even the religious education that they are getting is in line and balanced on both sides. This is where a big mismatch happens and the dominating attitude starts to come into play. I would say even I myself have been guilty of it in my marriage. At times I implemented it because I learned from people, just people around me, just being in the South Asian community, that when you're gonna get married, this is what your wife is supposed to do. This is what you're supposed to do, and deal with your problems on your own. That's one other thing that I find very contradictory in our South Asian communities is where we have a strong family support system. At the same time, that support system also works against you. And that's a very contradictory thing for you because when the real problems do occur and men do go for help, or even women does go for help, we are told to be on our own and to deal with to deal with it on our own, knowing what we learned, but nobody's coming and telling any of us this is how you should deal with it, or this is the right way to deal with it, because no one is really properly trained. And again, these societal pressures and conditions, they're keeping everybody locked into a certain mindset.
A lot of education needs to be done for faith-based leaders, for influential community members, policymakers. What I'm understanding from your viewpoints, and all community members, everyone needs to be educated. Everyone should have dialogue on this issue. And men from very early age, when they are in elementary school, middle school, they should see right role models and they should understand gender equality so that they can implement those understanding in their everyday life. I'm enjoying this conversation thoroughly, but we have to see the time. Maybe we can come back again for another episode to continue our conversation. But Maria, do you want to add anything here?
I think for me, I would basically just concur with everything that you both have said. And I was actually appreciating you very much for bringing in this conversation about bringing men into the conversation. I just saw the movie, and our three Indian movies I'd highly recommend to your listeners and to both of you in case you haven't seen it. One is called Article 13. The other one is called Thappar, which really made it big. I'm sure Nandini must be aware of that one. And then the latest one that has come out is 80. These are some brilliant moves in the right direction, and this gives me hope. I know that Maitri and many of Maitri's other sister organizations here and back home, I truly feel that the movement, as Ahsan says, there are multiple movements to be had from very individual level to the family unit to society itself, but also these massive actors which have an incredible influence at a global level should be petitioned around these conversations. They should be held responsible. There was, as Ahsan was saying, when those 80s movies or 70s movies, when they did what they did about being a dasi or what have you, there wasn't enough education around how much media was really influencing social behavior. Now there is no dearth of that information. Now we have studies upon studies, not just in the US, in the Bay Area, but actually back home as well, in India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal. We know what the impact is, and we should take responsibility. These massive actors, media actors, and I mean by media actors, not just the actors, actresses, producers, directors, scriptwriters, everybody should be responsible as to what, and I dare say, what absolute junk we are putting out right now. The levels of violence, the levels of aggression that we are justifying in the name of glamorizing violence on whatever level it is. So I feel like it's all a cycle, and I think the conversation, I have been really motivated myself actually when I watched Asi 2 nights ago, and I was literally thinking I would love to have a conversation with a bunch of a focus group discussion with several men of varying ages to understand what is it, how can we work against this, this whole idea, this whole Andrew Tate sort of incel mentality that has penetrated our societies as well. How do we work against it? And exactly that, we cannot work without men. And so that's all I would end with. It's been excellent. And I look forward to the conversation about coming back, and then we can continue more on this. There's much to talk.
Yeah, I know we are almost end of the session, but this is perfect opportunity for both of you. If you want to share one message for our community members who believe that holding on to strict cultural or gender expectations is a way of protecting or preserving cultural values. So, just one message. What would you like to say?
For me, I would say both in social and religious context, and before I tell others, I would tell myself first, is that be just. That is my message. Be just and balanced in terms of how you deal with each other as a couple and as individuals and humans. As long as we have a good understanding of being just and balanced, society could be heading towards a better future.
Great. Maria?
I think this probably will sound like a cliche, but I honestly feel for those of us who are parents as well as partners and in a married relationship or a couple relationship, and those who don't have kids as well yet, I would really like for you to stop and think, if the same thing were happening, whatever you are doing, however you are behaving, if someone was doing this to your sister, if your father was doing this to your mother, as a man, how would you feel? And if you are married and you already have children, think about the fact, how would you feel if this was happening to your daughter? And vice versa. It's not that just violence, often, as you were saying earlier, Nandini, there is an impact of the emotional, psychological violence that women too can inflict on men. And all of this carries an impact, some which we can see and some we cannot. So yes, think about what might happen if it was your son instead, or your father who was going through this. I think there's no other better way than to actually personalize the situation, stop and think what we are doing, because that is the only way. Would we like to be treated that way? Would we like our most beloved, most precious people be treated that way? And that, I think, is probably the closest measure to educate us. And as Ahsan said, to be more just, because what do we all want? We want justice for ourselves, right? More than anything. And so if we want to be just for ourselves and for our dearest ones, then perhaps we can return that as well.
Thank you, Maria. And if we want to sum up our conversation, the main thing I heard that we need a lot of education for everyone, for every level in our community, and constant conversation, understanding, identifying red flags, harmful norms that can affect our relationship.
Sorry, Nandini, can I add one small point,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So there's a book I've been really fascinated with. It's an amazing book. I think everybody should read. It's called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed by Paulo Freire. In it, he talks about our social system and how they condition us. And in it, he talks about education, but there's a term he uses which everybody needs to familiarize themselves with. It's a term praxis, meaning not only with education, there has to be an implementable action. With education, the action has to be there for things to change. Until praxis is there, things won't change. So we all need to not only educate, but have practical means of implementing that and be consistent in that implementation.
Wonderful. So as we wrap up today's conversation, I want to thank our wonderful guests, Ahsan Qazi and Maria Ahmed, for sharing their insights and experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for having us.
Listeners, today's discussion reminds us that harmful patriarchal norms and rigid gender roles don't just affect individuals, they shape our relationships, our families, and our communities. The good news is that culture is not static. The values we pass on to the next generation can evolve, and each of us has the power to be part of that change. I encourage you to start a conversation with your friends and family. Question the stereotypes we have accepted for generations. Model respect, empathy, and equality in your everyday interactions. Small changes in our homes and communities can lead to lasting change. Thank you for listening to the Maitri podcast. I'm your host, Nandini Ray, signing off today. Please follow, like, and share Maitri Bay Area's social media pages. And please share our podcast. Visit our website, maitri.org. Take care. Maitri is a free, confidential, non-profit organization based in the San Francisco Bay Area. that helps families and individuals facing domestic violence. Don't suffer in silence. Call Maitri Helpline 1-888-8 Visit our website
This show is for informational
maitri.org.
purposes only and is not to be construed as legal advice. Always consult an attorney for legal advice. Views expressed by guests of the radio show are individual opinions and not endorsed by Maitri.